The Democratic Republic of Congo has called on all insurgent groups operating in the east to accept peace agreements or face regional force. Now, the declaration was issued by the leaders of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi and Angola, as well as former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta after a summit in Luanda.
Congo's foreign minister has threatened insurgent groups with regional force unless they accept peace agreements.
If there is a group that refuses, that doesn't take the hand, they're going to be considered negative and fought by the regional force. We forget that the regional force is not only for the M23, but for all the movements there.
It comes just after African leaders declared a ceasefire on Wednesday in Congo's east, which is set to begin on Friday. The agreement is aimed at stopping attacks by the M23 rebel group in eastern Congo, a Tutsi-led group which Congo accuses Rwanda of backing. Rwanda denies the claims. The resurgence in fighting has caused a major diplomatic crisis. Thousands have also been displaced. The group has made substantial gains in recent months and is currently waging its most serious offensive in eastern Congo since 2012. The conflict is further destabilizing an area where armed groups have wrangled over land and resources for decades, despite billions having been spent by the United Nations on peacekeeping missions in the area. Demonstrations also broke out in Goma on Thursday, 20 kilometers or 12 miles from the front line. Hundreds took to the streets protesting that the peace agreement doesn't go far enough to tackle Rwanda's alleged backing of the group. The United Nations said in August that it had solid evidence that Rwandan troops had been fighting alongside the M23 group. The United States and the European Union have called on Rwanda to stop backing the group.
The M23 rebels in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo have said that a ceasefire supposed to take hold on Friday evening does not concern the group. They called on the DR government for a direct dialogue. The rebel spokesperson Lawrence Kanyuka said that as they had no representatives at Wednesday's mini-summit at the Angolan capital Luanda, they were not included in the accord. The signatories from Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola and Burundi said that under the cessation of hostilities, if the rebels did not withdraw from the area, an Eastern African regional force would attack their positions. Kinshasa has refused to engage with the M23, calling them terrorists. DR Congo accuses Rwanda of backing the M23 who have advanced on the regional capital Goma. Kigali denies the accusations. The M23 now occupies a big area in North Kivu province and is threatening to occupy Goma, the main city in eastern Congo.
Meanwhile, hundreds took to the streets in the Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern city of Goma in protest of an agreement by East African leaders to end attacks by M23 rebels. The protesters say that the agreement does not hold Rwanda to account for their alleged backing of the armed group.
The leaders of the DRC, Rwanda, Burundi and Angola, as well as former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, declared a ceasefire in Congo's east following a summit in Luanda, Angola. Demonstrators in Goma rejected the declaration, decrying what they call the silence and ambiguity of the international community towards massacres perpetrated by M23 with the alleged backing of Rwanda.
For us, the people, these agreements and summits do not interest us. What interests us is to have peace and security. That is right for us. We must not remain in this misery for decades. What we are asking for is the immediate withdrawal of the Rwandan army and the Ugandan army from Congolese soil.
Goma is about 20 kilometers from the front line of fighting in the most sustained offensive M23 forces have carried out since 2012, a year in which the armed group also had control of the city. Protesters say those who were party to the summit and declaration in Angola are only interested in furthering their own agendas.
At our level, we have always snubbed this kind of dialogue. We have always said that these dialogues are black messes against the country. Because of all those who sit in them, are the countries that have interests in Congo and that profit from all the rebellions and crimes that are committed in Congo. We even forbade our head of state to participate in their summit because it was a mess of hypocrites vis-à-vis the situation in Congo. Imagine how many summits these people have already organized on the DRC, which have not brought solutions. I believe that we must in any case go home, organize ourselves at home to face the threat, instead of wasting time in the summits where the hypocritical aggressors of the country meet.
Protesters made their way through the city and ended their march at the French and British consulates, where they delivered a memorandum demanding sanctions be imposed on Rwanda and Uganda for the alleged support of armed groups in the region.
We demand the international community as a whole call on the Rwandan and Ugandan heads of state to urgently remove their fighters camouflaged under the M23 RDF UPDF label. We also demand sanctions on Rwanda and Uganda for aggression against the DRC for more than 25 years, to establish a special tribunal in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo to try those responsible for atrocities and crimes committed from 1996 to the present. We also demand Rwanda to dialogue with the FDLR, Uganda to dialogue with the ADF, and Burundi to talk with the Red Tabara.
The M23 has not yet commented on the declaration, but its leadership had previously stated the group's willingness to engage. There has been an increase in anti-Rwandan sentiment in the DRC, as well as a widening diplomatic rift between Kinshasa and Kigali, following the latest uptick in rebel activity. In August, the UN claimed to have solid evidence that Rwandan forces had fought in cooperation with M23 forces. The United States and the European Union has also called for Rwanda to cease its support of the group.
Well, for some analysis on the current situation, we're now joined by Nixon Katembo, who's a Channel Africa producer and African affairs analyst. Great Lakes is one of the areas that he understands very well. Nixon, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to talk to you once again, Peter. We have been here before, and once again, here we are.
All right, let's talk about this gathering in Luanda. And one wonders who was meeting there and what could they have done, because it doesn't seem to have brought any fruit.
Look, I think the leaders who met in Luanda are missing the point of what are the root causes of what is going on in Eastern DRC. This is a protracted conflict that started in 1996. Albeit with many interests, but the main one being driven by Rwanda, of course, given its sustained presence in Eastern DRC with the support of various rebel groups from 1996, the latest being the M23. I think to me, one have to look at it in a way that what did the leader discuss that did not involve the leadership of the M23 itself. We have been hearing Rwanda denying, but instead, President Paul Kagame, representative Prime Minister Vincent Biruta, was the one signing on behalf of President Kagame and by extension the M23. Whereas Rwanda have been denying those accusations. So one wonder, why was Rwanda signing those agreements on behalf of the M23? And it's another caveat of which the M23 themselves can use to say, we are not part of these agreements, our representatives are not there, and it does not have anything to do with us. And hence you see the silence from the M23, or either giving conflicting signals on what they need to do. This afternoon, they signed a communique saying that they recognize the discussion in Luanda. However, they are demanding for a direct access to the mediator so that they can give them what they call in French cahier de charge. In other words, their grievances on the way forward in ending the conflict in Eastern DRC. So you have that blurred line between who is involved in this conflict and who is negotiating for who, particularly with those leadership. Hence, the discussion in Luanda was bound to fail because the main protagonists, which in this case the M23, were not in the summit. Although the leader might issue declarations, but those declarations have to trickle down to the M23 commanders and even the FRDC commanders, again, who are directly involved in the conflict.
The leaders issued effectively an ultimatum. They said that accept this hand of peace, else we're coming after you. Can the East African force do anything, this force that's being assembled? Can they deal with the problem?
Look, the UN has been there. Kenya has had troops in Eastern DRC supporting the United Nations. Uganda have had troops in Eastern DRC. Kenya is only adding more troops to what you already had there. Uganda, again, I hear they are sending another 1,000 troops in addition to what they already have. Rwanda, of course, is by extension the M23, because Rwanda, by all intent and purposes, is the RDF, Rwanda Defense Forces, which is nicknamed the M23 in this case. The question is, what is different that they are going to do if they have been there for a number of years? And the other questions have to be sent to the political class in Kinshasa. You have been in power. You had a time to reorganize your army, reconstitute the command and control of your units on the ground, and making sure that they respond to the threat. But instead, what we see is Kinshasa outsourcing its duty as a sovereign country. In other words, it's outsourcing its sovereignty to the East African Standby Force and many other international forces that have been deployed in Eastern DRC, without necessarily looking at what are the primary responsibility of the state towards its citizen, which is protecting the civilians and their own properties. So it's really a conundrum here. One, if you analyze it critically in looking at how this conflict is unfolding. And for me, arguably, I put the blame mostly on the government in Kinshasa in not reorganizing its own house to dealing with external threat against its national sovereignty. Peter, about 3 years now, when President Tshisekedi came to power, he had some cajoling talks with the M23 leadership, some of which spent almost a year and a half in Kinshasa, arguably with some funds promised to the M23 for demobilization and joining government. Instead, that money was looted by government officials in President Tshisekedi's government. What did they do? Instead, those commanders have returned now to fight the government of which they said they are joining. So the question is, if you lack diplomatic etiquette and statesmanship to understand the bigger problem of your country in designing policy and strategies to combat whatever threat that the country might encounter, this is where we find ourselves. Unless the DRC's army is reorganized, its institutions are organized afresh and set to respond to the need of the country and the people, we are bound to see happening. These diplomatic shattering are not going to find a solution to the DRC unless the DRC itself stands on its own and stamp its foot in warding off external threats such as the M23, which is supported by Rwanda.
I suppose it must be a challenge for President Tshisekedi to explain to his people, after he's expelled Rwandan diplomats out of the country, to then meet with the Rwandan Foreign Affairs Minister Biruta, and then to see his own citizens marching in Goma saying, this deal that you are brokering has nothing to do with us. So the people he represents are on the streets saying, what are you doing? How does he negotiate and navigate through this?
Certainly, Peter, that shows how much diplomatically out of touch the president is. And his entire inner circle, by the way, because they do not really understand what is really at the heart of the conflict in Eastern DRC. They are in Kinshasa, enjoying their normal lives as it is, but not really looking at the issue of statecraft in dealing with conflict, particularly with security issues, in making sure that they respond to the needs of the people. One wonder, where is the military intelligence in the DRC? Where is the threat assessment to the national security and making sure that they counter that? The M23 has been in Bunagana for quite some time. Why didn't the DRC army respond in the fighting it? It poses a million questions, and we know for the fact that the DRC is going to the election next year. But once you see this diplomatic shouting and showing a sort of a portrayal of toughness on the part of Kinshasa, that is for me a dressage. In other words, seeking to show themselves as acting tough on a much bigger problem that is happening in the DRC. For me, a fact of preparing sort of an election campaigneering coming up next year. But as long as there is no security sector reform, I have said it on many occasions, as long as there is no security sector reform in making sure that they build state institutions that are going to respond to any outside threats and avoid outsourcing the national security of the country, the conflict is going to continue.
All right, Nixon, we'll leave it there for the time being. Let's see what happens next. But as you said, we seem to have the same conversations and nothing seems to be moving forward. But we'll chat again soon. Thanks, Wanami.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's Nixon Katembo, one of our regular contributors, Channel Africa producer, and also an African affairs analyst, a specialist on the Great Lakes region.